There. And I'm sure we'll have more people join as we get a couple minutes past the hour, but thank you all so much for joining us. We're so thrilled to have Ciara Ruddock joining us this month as our featured artist of March 2025. I am just going to very briefly introduce Ciara and read her bio to you all, and then I will turn things over to Ciara to give her talk, and then we'll have questions and discussion and all that at the end. So without further ado, broadcasting from our studio here in X with Pauline and Nick behind me, I am going to introduce Ciara. Okie dokie. Ciara Ruddock, born in 1991, is a Brooklyn-based visual and social practice artist originally from the Bay Area. Ciara has attended fine arts programs with the Leo Marchutz School, Columbia University, and St. Mary's College of California. She is primarily interested in the connection between social, emotional awareness and its influence in the process of creation. Much of her work focuses on gestural dynamics, using painting to express memories and sensations of emotion or environment through a distinct use of color and form. Ciara is deeply involved in the arts education and mental health community. She has previously developed original arts programming for artists with developmental disabilities and serious mental illness in private and public programs in both New York and California. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ciara.
Thanks, Rose. Hi, everybody. I see familiar faces. It's good to see everyone, and thanks for having me. I guess the place that it makes most sense to start is how I came to Marchutz, which was a little unconventional. I started painting in undergrad, but not very seriously. I was a pre-med student on track to go to med school. I wanted to be a surgeon, but things were stressful and I wasn't really sure if that was the trajectory I wanted my life to take. So a professor I had at the time, who actually was a geneticist, researcher, he worked on grape research in the south of France, funny enough. And he knew that I wanted to go to France specifically. So he kind of toggled this idea of what if you took a semester off and went to this school where you study painting and drawing and take some time to think about, is this really what you want to do with your life, or do you want to do something else? And it didn't really take me very much time to think about it at all. I kind of immediately said, that sounds like a great idea. I could really use a break. And I didn't really know a lot about X. I think that's probably true for so many of us that came over there. I'd been to Paris and I'd been to other parts of France, but never down into the South. So when I got there, I remember it was really gray and it was in the winter. I went in the spring of 2012. And I remember being on an architecture walk with John and it was snowing and I was questioning oh God, why did I come here from California? It's so cold. And then as spring came out in the south of France, as many of you know, it really revealed itself and the beauty of the mountain and the countryside. And I just had such a transformative time being out in the landscape, not only painting, but being in community with other artists. I didn't have a really great sense of community at my college. Science students, we spent so much time studying and in our books that there wasn't really a lot of sharing to be had. So it was a really unique experience for me to be with like-minded people and not only make art together, but share parts of ourselves with each other. And I think that's something that stayed with me throughout my career as an artist and through art making, is that art not only is this expression of self, but it also allows us to connect with one another. And that's been a through line through my painting, though it's changed in style and in my process. The thing that's most important to me about art and art making is that connection that it provides and community that it creates with each other. And that was something that I learned first from being a part of Marchutz. So with that, I have a little slideshow to share. Let's see. Can everyone see what I'm sharing?
Yes.
Let's paint.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward in time, I graduated college. I moved to New York City and I kind of had no idea what I was doing. I was still like making art, but I was teaching and nannying and didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career and with my artwork. So in 2016, at the time, Marchutz had an MFA program that I decided would be a great opportunity for me to come back and kind of like reignite my relationship to painting. And this is me there in 2017 in Venice. The program was challenging in a lot of ways, but it also, like I said, reignited that relationship I had with painting. And at the time, I was facing a whole lot of stressors from different aspects of my life. And ultimately, it culminated in some health issues that caused me to leave the program early. And I found myself back in New York, which was a little bit of a chaotic moment. I wasn't really anticipating coming back so early, really, even at all. So I wasn't sure what to do. I knew I wanted to paint, but I didn't know what I wanted to paint. And going from painting in the landscape and in places like this in Venice, where I could just sit up in front of my easel and find a beautiful motif really anywhere, and then being kind of tossed back into New York, where the skyscrapers are all gray and the parks aren't really natural. They're designed by human beings. And I just didn't feel particularly inspired by the landscape that was around me. So I thought that the easiest way to kind of like recreate my experience was to start painting flowers. So I would just go to bodegas or the flower market or wherever I could find and get different bouquets of flowers and bring them back to my apartment at the time and paint from that. That was the easiest way that I could kind of recreate looking into nature as a subject. So this was one of the first paintings I painted when I came back from the grad program at Marchutz this is probably 2017 or 2018. And it was a really big painting, and it's done with oils, and it was completely from observing flowers, which is important to mention because I don't paint this way much anymore. And I was really just focused on looking at shadows and looking at light and trying to pull out what colors I could find. And I wasn't really I think that art is always a subconscious expression of how we're feeling at any given moment. But at this time, I hadn't really developed that language or that relationship with my painting. I was really just looking at what I saw and trying to depict it into a painting. So, with some time, I ended up getting a studio in New York, which was white walls, white floors, no window, horrible lighting, like absolutely horrible, not anything like what I had been doing at Marchutz, which was really, I was so grateful to have the studio because I could kind of go and create and make a mess and then close the door and leave it all behind versus painting in my apartment. But the sterile environment of this like white space was so stark of a contrast to what I had been accustomed to. So I kept painting flowers, but I was also working at a museum at the time and doing a lot of animation and video production and working with like a totally different landscape of colors than I was used to. So I started, this is a painting that I made when I was working in that studio. I started using the forms that I saw in nature, but started using imagined colors. So either colors I had been working with at the museum in animation or just whatever color was interesting to me at the time. But this was the first painting I made that really I gave myself permission to not only depict what I saw in reality, but give myself some creative liberty in using colors that maybe were arbitrary to somebody viewing the piece, but to me, they were colors that were prominent in my life. And this next one was the last flower painting I did from observation before the pandemic came, and this one was similar in the sense that not all of these colors, like these were daffodils that were sitting on a wooden floor. So these like dark blues and purples didn't exist. Those just came from my mind, but I allowed myself to be a little more free in terms of gesture, whereas before I was using a lot more line and form. And this was the beginning of me kind of leaning into how to express emotion, not only through color, but also through mark making. So now here it's 2020. I'm stuck in my apartment. The studio is gone. I have no idea what to paint. My access to flowers now is even that is limited. And so I thought, okay, what do I have that exists in my mind that I can pull from? I had gone to see this show, a Joan Mitchell show, a few years before, and it was called Internal Landscapes. And aside from loving all of the paintings that were in that show, I just loved that title of the landscapes that live within us and how do we bring those to life. So I took it in a more literal sense and did a series of about like 10 or 12 paintings and drawings of landscapes from memory. So this landscape is from some time we spent in Giverny when I was there for the MFA program, and it was down by the river. It was a motif that I went to over and over again. I was there in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. I was obsessed with this motif, so I could draw it with my eyes closed. I could still remember it now if I needed to paint it, but the forms were really prominent to me. But in terms of the color, that wasn't as strong, especially since it shifted so much depending what time of day I happened to be there. But like I said, this is just one of a big series of these that I did, but I tried my best to pull colors that I remembered seeing there, but also started to mix them with colors that I was interested in that moment.
Ciara,
So this
are
is,
these big paintings?
oh, great question. All of this painting is small. These questions are really big, or these canvases are big, but
That's
this one
beautiful.
was small. These are were large paintings. This was also during 2020 when I was just trying to work from my mind. I had run out of landscapes to go through, and I thought that I had painted enough flowers that I could imagine flowers onto a canvas. So these two paintings are the only paintings that I've made in this way. I took some chalk pastels and just made different marks on a raw canvas and laid a really thin layer of gesso over the colors to just blur them out so that there weren't any definitive lines. And then I went back in on both of these with some thicker gesso and charcoal and almost like carved the flowers out of the colors that were on the canvas. And they're flowers that maybe I've painted before, or maybe I've seen before. I couldn't really tell you how they came to life, but this felt very sculptural. And these are, like I said, the only two paintings that I've created in this way. So those are unique in that sense. And from there, the next couple of paintings I'm going to show are indicative of how I relate to art now. And my painting coming out of the pandemic, I started writing social emotional programming for a couple of different schools and using art as a way to teach young people how to develop a language of how they're feeling. So a lot of times in schools here, we don't teach young people how to express themselves. And that was an experience that I had in school as well. And I really felt passionate about the fact that art is a language and it allows us to share how we're feeling at any given moment. So what I was doing at the time was taking these really intricate color wheels. There were, dozens of colors on these wheels with no labels. and side by side with students going through the color wheels on a regular basis and pointing to a color and saying, what does this shade of green make you feel? What does this hue of red make you feel? And over time, the students and myself developed our own language of color. So maybe red for me was a color that depicted anger, but for somebody else, maybe it depicted joy. So going through color by color and understanding how our human experience directly related to those colors and practicing that. And these paintings are paintings I made during that time, trying to put this into action so that I could show other people how to do it, but also in tandem changing the way and that I make art and my relationship to art. So now at this point, I've moved completely away from having any external subject. I wasn't looking at anything except aside from within, and just really thinking about how I feel at any given moment. And these both are large canvases. The one on the left is really more of a kind of like a color swatching exercise. You can see underneath some of the paint, there's some like gestural work with pastels that is the beginning of a process that I'll talk about in the right painting in a moment. But this painting was really me just thinking about those colors that I had been working on developing a language with and thinking how I felt in that moment and using those colors that related to how I was feeling to lay them down on the page or on the canvas. But after making this, I realized that there was a pretty distinct connection between the mark that is made and like the emotion that I'm trying to depict. For example, like if I'm feeling calm or tranquil, I might have had like a more flowing mark versus like these choppy little brushstrokes. So I started exploring that and also incorporating that into the work that I was doing, but also the paintings I was making. So the one on the right was a new technique where I started with a large oil pastel and just thought about what are the gestures attached to how I'm feeling in this moment. So different marks that relate to emotion. And then after all of those marks are laid down on the page, going back and thinking in terms of color and pulling out forms from those marks that relate to the colors that are in my experience in that moment. And this is something that I continued doing. It's something that I'm still doing. So this painting on the left is a more direct connection between, I didn't make the marks and then add the color. I was using the color and the marks together at the same time. And that is true for the watercolor that's small on the right as well. And at this point now, in these paintings up here, I had to really sit and think, okay, this is how I feel, and this is the color that matches that feeling, or this is how I feel, and this is the gesture that matches that feeling. Whereas here, because I'd been practicing it so often and really like flexing that muscle, I was able to sit down and like be in flow with that practice and allow my subconscious mind and trust my artistic instincts to know that the colors and the forms that are coming out are true to how I'm feeling that moment, which I think is true for all of us when we're making art. But it was something that I had become more consciously aware of as I was making, which really changed my relationship from being so concerned with the product that I was making and what something looked like in the end, and so much more interested in what is the process of making and how does that feel and how does that look. So this is a painting from 2 years ago. The painting on the right is a small watercolor. I was in Mexico City when I did this. I was really inspired by all of the different colors and the gardens, and I spent a lot of time just sitting in the gardens with my watercolor pad and just trying to capture the colors that I saw. I wasn't so concerned with form or perspective or anything like that. I really was just trying to get as many colors onto the page as possible. So I had it almost as a record when I got back, because the painting on the left is a painting I made when I got back from the trip. Obviously, I couldn't carry I mean, I guess I could have if I really wanted to, but I didn't want to carry huge canvases with me. So I used this little reference book essentially of watercolor paintings that I'd made there to then create this painting on the left. And I started this similarly to the painting a few slides back, where I sat down and I really tried to like focus in on not only how I was feeling at that moment, but like the feeling of the trip, and just trying to capture an experience in this painting, and drew out some different forms that felt aligned for me in that moment, and then went back and added in the color. And I didn't have my watercolor booklet with me as a reference. It just, those colors had really been at the forefront of my mind because I'd been spending so much time with them and using them to create, that they just kind of naturally made their way into this painting. And then this takes me to what I've been working on for this past year, which feels like so far away from where I began when I was painting flowers. But I've spent the past year really trying to use painting as a way to like interrogate myself and my human experience, and just re-strengthening that understanding that I've formed between gesture and color. And these paintings I usually do in 1 or 2 sessions, so that like the feeling and the sensation feels connected. If I put too much time between days that I'm working on these, I start to disconnect from where I began, and it doesn't feel as cohesive. But I start these with mark making. So I take like soft chalk pastel and lay down different marks and forms. And I have a very like ritualistic style of painting these. And just even with my painting practice at all now, you know, I'll like make some tea and light some incense and put on music that feels aligned with whatever my mood is at the time, and really try to like set an environment, and then get into a flow state. So these are really purely subconscious creation. I'm not thinking about what colors I want or what forms I want. I'm just kind of letting myself hash it out, so to speak, on the canvases. And these are just 2. I've got 11 or 12 of these that I'm going to showcase next month at a studio in Dumbo. But these feel to me like, I don't know if this is how I'll continue painting forever. Like I said, this has been a really almost cathartic form of creating for me for this past year, of really just letting go of what things look like and what the product is. And oftentimes I'll paint these and then put them away so that I'm not looking at them, to really kind of like nail that in, that it really is for me about the experience of what I'm releasing as I'm painting. And with that, I am going to stop sharing and kick it back over to all of these lovely humans out here.
Thank you so much, Ciara. That was so wonderful to see all your work and how it's evolved over the last several years. We can now open it up for discussion and questions. And how we usually like to do is, if you are going to ask a question, you can just sort of put your hand up like this, and then just make sure you unmute yourself on Zoom, because you're all automatically muted there to keep the background noise down. And if I may, Ciara, I'll get us started with a question. I'm so curious about your sort of day-to-day practice, and how much of your time is teaching and working in schools and working with students, and then how much of your time is, you know, in your studio making art and all that, and how do those 2 different things that you're doing and your 2 different sort of worlds, how do those influence each other? And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, good question. I don't work with students anymore. I work in mental health. I'm something that's called a social practitioner. So it's social practice in the mental health world. And I work full time. I'm there 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So that has really changed what my relationship with my art looks like. there's something, I think Alan or John said this to me a long time ago, that like being an artist is more than just the art that you make. It's how you live your life and how you spend your time and your relationships and everything that you do. So I really try to, if there is a day where I don't have time at the end of the day to make a painting, I try to cultivate some aspect of creativity in my day, whether that's looking at art that someone else made or having a conversation with a friend about art, or maybe I just have time to journal or make a quick sketch. And then my weekends are really reserved for that time where I can really get into the flow state and paint, because something I've learned about myself is that just chunking out an hour or two to paint doesn't really serve me in the same way as giving myself the freedom to work on something for 2 to 6 hours. So I try my best to cultivate creativity in smaller ways throughout the week.
Cool. Thank you. What other questions are there for Ciara or comments? You can just go ahead and unmute yourself when you have one. Yeah, go ahead, Matangi.
Hello, hi Cece. Okay, so I actually have two questions. One, when you shared the two paintings that you made in 2020, they're black and white, and it's like very different from something you've been working with for a while, where you're using a lot of color, and then like you're using observed color and then imagined color, and then you kind of go into this black and white space. So like what was kind of that transition period like for you, and like what about 2020 like brought that out? And then another question is, right now I kind of notice your work is more contained, like it's like contained within a frame, like there's like a kind of like a border treatment in the work that you shared that you're doing over the past year, versus before it felt like it was kind of just just like an like observation. So like what has that transition been like, and like is there kind of like a purpose of the border treatment?
Hello, thank you for coming, Callie. Um, the black and white paintings, it's so funny that you asked that, because as I was putting together the slideshow, I was having that realization to myself of, wow, this is the only time I've been completely disinterested in color. I love color. I've always loved color. I think like the brighter, the better. Um, and I think, I mean, without actually knowing, I think that 2020, as all of us know, was a really dark, difficult time for so many reasons. Not only COVID, but like I was really active in the protests after the murder of George Floyd, and was just like moving through a lot of really heavy, difficult emotions. And part of me wonders if there is some correlation between those things. But I'm not really sure, but that's the thing that kind of sticks out at the forefront of my mind in terms of that. And in terms of the paintings now with the frames, it almost feels like, so the last painting that I made from the series doesn't have a frame. I like sliced it off. Um it kind of felt like to me like adding that in brought everything together, which felt really different than everything I've done before, because things were kind of floating in space. um, I think there's like a little bit of like rebellion of self in that, of me just wanting to do something so differently than I had done before, and kind of clinging to that. And now I'm in the process of now letting go of it again and letting it be a part of the past.
What other questions are there for Ciara? Just remember to unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Hi. Hi, Ciara. Um, so you mentioned Joan Mitchell earlier in the presentation, and for inspiration for finding your landscape within. And I'm wondering, now that you've been painting, or when you do, you're reflecting and it seems very internal. Are there other artists that maybe you're not like opening the book, but you're in your memory having inspiration from when you're starting, maybe finding your mood? Do other artists come forward for you?
Good question. There have been a lot of surrealist artists, which actually Kali here we have discussions about this a lot. Going to like Mexico City, there's so many incredible surrealist women Mexican artists that their style is so completely different than mine, but it is this completely imaginary realm of creation and just pulling from your own mind. So I think there is a lot of that that comes to my mind when I'm making things, and a lot of the women from the expressionist movement in New York, as well, the abstract expressionist movement, that were painting really large abstract things that maybe didn't make sense to anybody else, but really were like a full expression of self. Like I read 19th Street Women a couple of years ago, and all of the women in that book definitely come to mind when I'm working in the way that I am now.
Thank you. Other questions? Oh, Patricia, go ahead.
Yeah, no, one of the things, your latest work, I really, really love. The direction you're going in is quite interesting to me, but it reminded me too of Paul Klee and some of his ways of developing the relationship between shapes. And so I couldn't really tell from the slides that you put up, but I wonder if you could say more about some of the areas of color seem kind of flat and others seem more modulated and had more texture or three-dimensionality. And I wonder if that's like a deliberate thing on your part to have some things recede into planes of color and other things kind of burgeon out, or how you're conceiving of texture in that regard.
Yeah, good question. You're right. Good noticing. That is something that is more prominent in the work that I'm making now, and something that I wasn't thinking about when I started painting in that way. Typically, when I first start those paintings, I start with almost like a wash of color in certain forms, not all of the forms at first, but I found these water soluble pastels that I really love because you can really like work them up or work them down, and they work on paper and canvas, and they're super versatile. So I've been enjoying those because I can create one color in a form, but then I can kind of go back and almost kind of akin to those black and white flower paintings, like carve out different dimensions within it. And it creates almost like windows, because what I was finding is as I was continuing with that geometric style was that even though I am trying to detach from caring so much what the product looked like I'm a human being, of course, I still want to enjoy looking at my paintings. And I just felt like they didn't have any dimension to them at all. And I was losing a lot of the light because I was not used to filling up a canvas with color. I was used to kind of letting the canvas breathe through. So allowing those like paints with more dimension, or piling up a little extra oil paint to kind of make one part raised versus another part flattened, helped me find a little more peace with the way that the composition existed.
It's great. That's a really good experimental direction to go in, I think. It's really interesting.
Thanks, Patricia. I appreciate that.
Other questions or comments for Ciara? People back here?
Well, I had a couple of questions, but maybe one was, it was very interesting to me, Ciara, to also see how there were a sense of patterns and movement in your abstract shape. And I wonder how much your experience with Marchutz built in that sort of sense of movement and pattern in the way that shapes talk to one another and the emotion that we can get out of them, even though they are very abstract, there's still a sense of repetition. These patterns.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, when I was at Marchutz the second time, I was really fascinated with color and movement and how they relate to each other. And I was doing a lot of study of dancers and Degas and trying to find that relationship. And it's something that I continued to do when I came back to New York of drawing live dancers and continuing to do copies of painting that had a lot of movement in it. So I definitely think that it's something that is just kind of a foundational. I mean, Marchutz really is my foundation for all of my art. It is where I learned how to paint and kind of how I developed my sense of color and my sense of movement and all those things. So I definitely think it would make a lot of sense that that finds its way into whatever art that I make.
Ciara, I have a question about your process. Beautiful, beautiful color. Oh my God. It's sort of Rothko-esque as well as there's very calming kind of beautiful calming light that comes from your paintings. But I was wondering, just in terms of your process, so you draw the shapes on there first, right?
Right.
So is it sort of a Zen process where you just let the shapes come and that's what it is? Or do sometimes you say, oh, no, I don't want that sort of triangle down there. I want to move it back up there. Do you change a lot as you're sort of drawing your shapes, or does it just happen?
You gave me words that I didn't have, but it is totally a Zen process. I've done some that I've done in that kind of Zen way and then gone back and self-edited of, ooh, I don't like this shape here, and tried to add it somewhere else and been completely dissatisfied with how the work looks. But it is exactly that. It's very, which is part of like the ritualistic aspect of it, of like
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
for me to be in a certain state of being and it just flows out of me.
Nice. One other thing I'm going to send you Chris Coffey's email and send Chris Coffey your email because you have a lot in common in terms of a lot of big paintings that Chris Coffey does. I think you'd be interested in talking to him or, chatting back and forth.
Fabulous.
I told you that when you were here, but then I forgot, but I'm going to send that to you.
Please do. Thanks,
Yeah.
Alan.
Can we look at your last painting again?
Sure. Let me share my screen.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful color.
Thank you.
And
I love color.
So there, and you don't change the color when you use the color either. It happens and you just let it happen. You don't
Right.
say, oh, oops, I put the green on the right. I should have put it on the left and take it out and redo it. You just let it flow.
Yep.
Mm.
And Ciara, do you mix up a palette before you start painting, or do you sort of mix as you go?
I mix as I go. I used to mix up a palette first, and now I mix as I go.
Very cool. I was so struck by your sort of, what did you call it? Like your watercolor travel record that you did in Mexico City. I just love how you were sort of noticing colors and shapes and all of that and keeping sort of like a journal of your time there. It's such an interesting way to record your travels. I think that is so smart. And then
It's
to
such
use
a good way too of maintaining a relationship to the landscape and painting from the landscape. Because I still love that, and I find so much joy in just being outside and painting outside. But it's not my primary focus. So it's a great way to like keep that practice alive because it all informs each other.
Absolutely. Have you done that in different cities? You mentioned Mexico City, but have you done that on other travel, other vacations and things like that?
I haven't, but I'm going to Mexico City tomorrow, so I'm going to do it again, and we'll see what happens.
Oh, that's so great. Such a beautiful palette you have. Other questions? Yes, please go ahead.
You said that you have like an emotive connection to the colors. So I see a lot of red and shades of red. So what is that emotion?
Ah,
So I used to have a really I used to do a very literal like translation. Like I could show you a painting and tell you every single emotion that matches those colors. And now I've moved away from that for so long and it's become so subconscious that I don't necessarily know. I can share with you that this past year of creation, like this has been a really tumultuous year for me, a really difficult year. And I think that red, like my nails are that color red right now. I love red, I love orange, like all of those warm tones, they bring me a lot of joy. And a lot of these paintings are in my surroundings. So I think that there's a part of my subconscious that knows if I bring that color into my work and into my home and into my space, there's some connection to this feeling of joy.
Nice.
Other questions or comments for Ciara? Well, thank you so much. Oh, Sharon, do you have something to say? Did I see your hand? You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Sorry for being lame there for a minute. I'm curious. Do you have a studio again now?
I paint out of my apartment now.
Do you find that more enveloping in the sense of it's not quite so sterile and maybe that helps the whole
Yeah.
Zen thing happen?
Yeah, I do really for a long time I had a lot of feelings about painting out of my apartment. I didn't really like being surrounded by my art, but now it does feel like I have so much more control over the environment and I'm surrounded by things that I like, and I like having my apartment as the space that I work out of because it's so much more accessible, especially with my work situation. You know, I can come home and I can work on a painting for a little while if I want to without having to travel to a studio. But that being said, I do, as many of you know, painting is can be a solitary art form, and I do miss the community aspect of having a studio and a space, but I don't miss the white walls, white floor, bright light environment.
I really enjoyed seeing all of your work from the flowers and the idea that you were using flowers as a way of getting back into seeing nature when you weren't able to be out in nature. And then the last two that you showed, which I guess is part of a series. And those are very interesting. They almost have a paper cutout look to them, which made me wonder how much Matisse might have influenced you, whether consciously or subconsciously. And the whole idea of, to use that word, Zen, I am really curious. Does that mean that, okay, you're going to start a new painting? Do you just get out your canvas and put the first mark down and see where that takes you? Or do you have a thought in your head generally of what idea you want to express? Or is it just all completely coming from I'm not saying this very well, I'm sure, but coming from your subconscious? I think that's what intrigues me about um, more non-representational work. I mean, yours isn't completely that way because you can see shapes and forms, but how does one start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when I first started working in that way, because I didn't know where to start, I would start with a really intentional experience that I wanted to depict, whether that was, good, bad, or anywhere in between, like some really impactful memory, and using the emotions and the feelings from that to then create a painting. But over time, as I've, continued painting in this way, it really is, I have my rituals so I can get myself into the mode of, okay, it's time to create. And I have a standing rule for myself that my easel must always have a blank canvas on it. So if the moment comes, it's ready to go. Because it really is just that. It's like some weekends I'll carve out the time to paint, but I don't feel the urge to create in the way that I do. And I've found that when I force myself to make the painting, when I might not feel so inclined, I can't get into flow as easily. And it feels really counterintuitive to my practice in general, because I'm a firm believer that creativity is a muscle and you have to exercise it, which is why I've incorporated other ways of exercising it into my life. But it really is just kind of like waiting for something to move me. And that could be like a flower I saw on my walk or some moment I had in my own life. But I trust that there will be a moment that will be the catalyst to create something. And as long as I've got that canvas set up on the easel, I just go for it.
Seems to be working out really well.
Thank you.
I kind of, I don't want to read anything into something, but the colors are beautiful, and there seems to be an undercurrent of, if not joy, content. And I think that's very nice. So thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ciara. Any other questions or comments for Ciara before we wrap up? Well, thank you so much, Ciara, for taking the time to share your work and present all of that with us, and also for sharing your writing and everything on our website too. We so appreciate you taking the time, especially right before your vacation. So let's give a little virtual round of applause to Ciara. And thank you all, the rest of you, so much for joining us tonight. It's so good to see all your faces, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to log on with us here tonight. So take care, everybody, and a big thank you to Ciara.
Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.